Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Harebrained Games. Today we're going to take a look at a game called Imperium Classics by Nigel Buckle and David Turczi. This is a card game that features a civilization building type style, wherein you will pit your civilization against other civilizations using your own custom deck of cards and a set of common cards and try to achieve the ultimate in glory. Glory equaling victory points. Without further ado, let's take a look.
Okay, let's go over what comes in every box of Imperium Classics by Nigel Buckle and David Turczi. First off, let's go over the common elements first. You're going to get what is effectively the conveyor belt of civilizations here. Now, in the game, you have this common market area for common cards. You have underneath this line of common cardness, you have different types of cards. You have, I'll look over here, you have regions. Some civilizations care about regions. You have unrest. These are typically bad cards or cards that clog up your deck. You want to get rid of them. They're not worth victory points at the end. They're worth negative victory points, but you'll get into those later. Then we have regions. We have initial buildings or initial civilizations for there's a technical term for it, but it's uncivilized. So the uncivilized cards in the early stages of every player's civilization as they advance. Then we go to civilized, and these are a different set of buildings. And you'll notice that there's a reservoir of each type here, and then there's the main market. Any of the cards that don't get put into the reservoirs for each type of card are going to get put in here. This is an amalgamation of all the 4 different card types, 2 of which are available at any time. What's interesting is that unlike regions, every other card, if you actually bring one out as you replace them, is going to need an unrest card underneath. So not only will you get the good parts of advancement, but you might have to pay a little bit of unrest in addition to that. You also have these power cards, and this is really the deck that one of the ways to win is to have this deck depleted. And these are powerful cards, which I won't show you to spoil it, other than there's always a King of Kings card at the end. And this triggers the end. If everyone gets through and collects these, and there were some victory points, there we go, victory points, then that also triggers the end game and gives you a nice surplus of victory points. Then you have the tokens. You have production resources, you have people, and you have progress points, progress tokens. You also have these action tokens, which look sort of like a poor man's Lords of Waterdeep currency, but you actually use those to count off the amount of actions you take per turn, and exhaust tokens. These are so that if you use a card's exhaust ability, which you will see shortly, you will place these exhaust tokens on them to note that you have taken their exhaust action for the turn. And again, looking closer, you'll see that a lot of these cards have different things they do. Gain this, gain that, exhaust to gain this, gain that, draw a card, discard, exile, blah, blah, blah. So many terms. And then solstice, because at the solstice is basically an end of round designation. So as players play, and we'll get into the setup for each player here, but each player is going to take their own custom deck. That's what's different. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different decks tweaked for a given civilization, and each one has different priorities, different benefits, drawbacks, different angles at which you'd want to deal with and manipulate the market. It's really cool. But in each player is going to have their main card here, which is kind of this is my civilization card per se. They have, again, another name for it, but nation cards. This is a set of of cards that you're going to slowly add to your main deck. And then, well, let's put it this way. You start off with, well, this is the A side. B side's usually easier, but mostly this kind of gives you the anchor. For example, this one says for every one of these tributary card types, you're going to get a victory point. So you're going to be looking for those through the game and trying to grab those. Then, while you're in the early stages, the uncivilized stage, you're going to be going through your deck, and this deck has different cards for each different civilization. They're doing different things, so you will shuffle and take 5 of those as a starting hand, which again we'll get into. And then as you cycle through this deck, you're going to be not only buying or grabbing cards from the market, or taking them, or what's doing called a breakthrough, you're also going to, at the end of each cycle, grab one of these cards and add it in. When that's done and you finally add this card in, well, now you've become civilized, a civilized society. And then you will then flip over this card and you're now an empire. When that happens, you can start buying these cards and they're even more powerful. And every nation's a little bit different, but that's the general gist of it as you go through play until one of various and sundry victory conditions are achieved. For example, if that main deck is empty, that's the end. If someone buys all of their developments, that's the end. If the King of Kings card is flipped down, that's the end. If the Vikings or the Arthurians and Utopians, they have special unique conditions of their own, etc., etc. That's a bit of an example of gameplay. Once again, that's the Solstice card. So anyway, whenever everyone takes a turn, player to the left, player to the right, then Solstice effects can take a bit of a, there we go. So you can exact these solstice abilities as well, and those are once per round rather than once per your turn. So lots of stuff going on in this seemingly simple card game. Let's take a look at an example of gameplay. Okay, so we have the Persians and the Macedonians. Notice that the Macedonians have a passive ability. When you play a region from your discard pile, gain two of those production tokens. So that's pretty cool. On the other hand here, like the Persians, they can exhaust this card, spend an action, put 2 cards under their top of their deck, and then pay 1 to do what's called a breakthrough to grab one of these tributary cards, and they're powerful. So basically, you're giving a little bit by having to put cards back on your deck when you're trying to cycle through them, but you get a powerful tributary card. How you play a game, and we're not going to give you all the insight, we're just going to go over a quick example because this game could go on and on and on. There's lots of great live playthroughs that I hope people will take advantage of on the internet. But on your turn, you can activate, innovate, or revolt. Activate means you get to basically play these cards. This is kind of the main action you're going to do. You activate cards. As many of these tokens as you have, you can activate, but you can play cards into your tableau that have different benefits. So each one that you play usually has something going on. So for an example, I'm going to take an action here, and I'm going to play this region of mine. It says gain 3. You may also garrison a card. What is that? Well, say you have a card that you really don't want to cycle through, because one of the things that you're going to want to emphasize is getting through this deck, because the faster you get through the deck, the faster you get better cards, the faster you get your civilization advanced. So let's say, oh, you know what? Oh, those Lydians. No, let's do Conquer. We have 2 Conquers, so we'll do that. So now we've garrisoned a card, which means it's kind of out of play until something happens to that region, but we don't have to worry about it clogging our deck in inconvenient ways. Then a second action, we can, let's just do that. We're going to spend an action. Let's actually do this. So we're going to exhaust this card and show you how exhaust works. Exhaust says you spend an action, so I have to spend an action on it. Place 2 cards back onto my deck, and I'll place these 2 back onto my deck. And then I can pay 1 people person to get a breakthrough. Now there's ways to do it. There's acquire. Acquire means you grab one of these cards that are visible. The drawback is that you also have to grab the unrest card underneath, except for the regions. Breakthrough says you break through. Think of breaking across the market lines, and you're going to break through to one of these unknown piles and grab specific cards that you want or need. And they usually specify which types you can. In this case, we need a tributary card, so we go, we keep going. There it is. There's our tributary card. We're able to grab that. We shuffle, 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 and we are done with that. And we get to grab this card. So this card is now in our tableau. That's great. So what powerful? Well, let's just use it. We have 1 action left. So let's have some fun, and let's use that final action to acquire this card, an uncivilized card. The port, cool. This one says I can exhaust it and gain 1 goods or production material per this icon in my play area. Now, I don't have any regions with icons, but say, for example, I grab this one. Notice that they match up, which means I can start using my regions to accumulate goods. Unfortunately, I also have to take the unrest card and put it, unrest card. So there we go. All right, so we did that, we grabbed that. Then, of course, we need to replace it, so we take this, place that down there, Yep, and we have to put an unrest card underneath. There you go. And that's what you're basically doing. When you're done with your 3 actions and you've done all the things you can exhaust, then you have to add prestige token onto a marketplace, because that might sweeten the pot for other players to grab that and get free victory points. Not a bad deal. You then clear all your tokens back onto your card. Sorry, I'm a barbarian. How barbaric. There we go. And then we can discard as many cards as we want. In this case, I'm going to discard all 4 and then draw back up to 5. And that is basically the end of my turn. If, say for example, we're drawing up and we're like, oh, I only have 2 cards left, sadness. There's some housekeeping to do with putting exhausted, but basically what you're doing is you start adding these cards from here into your deck, shuffling up, and then grabbing 5, and you're going to keep doing that until this is all exhausted, and again, until this card is exhausted each time that you shuffle the deck. You only do it once per round. There's things you have to put on there to kind of make sure you don't try and get 2 cards, because if you deck thin enough, you might be able to pull that off. And that goes on. And then, again, once you've gotten where all of these cards are in your deck, then the next time it's time to go through, you'll be an empire, and an empire lets you actually make use of these buildings. You can't use these buildings until you're an empire, and these are a little more powerful than the uncivilized buildings. And so you're going to do that, and unlike your uncivilized buildings, you can choose which one of these you want to build. You don't have to just randomly pick. The drawback, of course, or the draw up, is that you're going to have to pay the cost. You're going to have to pay a cost to develop these by paying these resources, and then that goes into your deck, etc. If you exhaust all of these, that triggers the end of the game. Finally, there are times when you're going to be able to use, say, glory cards to acquire these King of Kings cards. And again, if you look at these are very powerful. I won't give it away, and they give you mega victory points on the average. And that's it. That's basically how it goes. You're going to play through this. You're going to be done. Other things you can do, you can always do what's called innovate. Throw down all of your cards and do a breakthrough. That's kind of a, like, hey, I really want that card. I really want it now. I'm just going to, throw caution to the wind and grab it. And finally, there's Revolt. Revolt is revolting. I'm kidding. Say, for example, you have a hand like this, and you're like, oh wow, such unrest, such unhappiness, oy vey. What you can do is a revolt. It takes up your entire turn, and all it does is you basically put those back on the unrest pile. Because one other way that you can end the game is if all of the unrest cards are gone, everything stops. All of your civilization and everything that you've done up to that point becomes less relevant than how many unrest cards you have in your hand. It's sort of a quote, nuclear option. And so you want to be mindful of that too. If that deck ever gets low and you're in a position where you don't want to have the game come to an abrupt halt because of too much unrest, then you'll definitely want to think about using opportunities to get unrest cards back into the fold so that you don't wind up losing in a way that you didn't expect. That's it. Again, there are 8 different civilizations in the main box. We also have Imperium Legends, which is a more fantastical and slightly less historical set of nations that can play similarly to, can all be combined, etc., etc. And again, I didn't say the manual. Here's the manual. It's got a manual for the rulebook. It's also got a manual for the solo version of the game, which is very robust as well. But I'm getting into my review now. But you can play it solo against and for all 16 of the nations in both the different packs. But that's it. That's basically Imperium Classics in a box. Let's get to my final thoughts.
Right, Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends. I will be basically giving my thoughts on both since I bought them and combined them both. Let's go over the cons as we always do in games. I would give this as a caveat and a warning more than a con. Many times you play a game and your instincts are the size of the box or the biggest, the massivity of the components determines kind of its amazingness and the length and complexity, etc. A lot of times we have this sort of preconceived notion that if something's the card game, that it's easier, faster, and simpler, like Lord of the Rings, the card game. Monopoly, the card. Okay. But Dominion, the card game, or anything that's like the card game version. Do not make this mistake with this game. Do not underestimate it as a simple, just lighthearted civilization game. It's not. It is. When you're playing this game, you are settling in for a long Civ's nap. You really are. This is a full-fledged civilization builder, more akin to, say, Through the Ages in its scope and sprawlingness than Dominion for Nations. Each card, I swear, each card weighs a pound from the extra icons on it, but I'm kidding. But generally speaking, it is not a simple game of any stretch. Expect to not find this tremendously streamlined and simplified. I think I've made that point. Sleeve the cards. The cards are, if you're going to play this at all and enjoy it the way I'm going to, the cards are not terrible quality, but they are ones that, because of the use, I'm going to be sleeving them a lot, just because they're not like the awesomest. I would never play this game with 4. I don't, I just, the downtime, just, there's some interaction, but it's just not, I would not play this with 4. I just wouldn't. I would play it with 3. I think I could probably find that the upper tolerance of just waiting for other people to take their turns, etc. I definitely would play it with 2. And I would most absolutely play it with 1. It has a tremendous AI bot single-player framework that's right up my alley. The manual gets a 5.0 on technical merit, but maybe a 3.1 on artistic merit. It's incredibly precise in describing each part of the game while being nominally informative in the why department, as in, why would I do this? Why would I take that action? Why would I do this over that? Etc., etc. There's lots of terms here. It's reminiscent of a game called Innovation in the past that had a ton of different kinds of terms: melding, splaying, tucking, dogmas, icons, achieving, returning, exchanging. Here you have a similar nomenclature. It's very precise because they really want you to understand the differences between like-minded terms. You're going to be acquiring cards. You're going to break through to get cards. You're going to take cards. You're going to give cards. You're going to draw cards. You're going to look at cards. You're going to abandon cards. You're going to exile cards. You're going to discard cards. You're going to garrison cards. And all of these things need to be understood. I honestly feel like the manual has basically 3 pages of rules and 9 pages of rules exceptions, but that's not entirely true. If that's something that you feel like, that seems a little overwhelming, then this might not be the game for you. Just FYI, there's Nations, the dice game. There's a few others that you might look at. I would recommend that you look at the errata if you're going to play the solo play, or just keep up to date with it. There's a rule change or a rule clarification that really changes the complex. It changes the solo play in a way that makes it easier than it might have first appeared. So for someone like me, that's gold. So anyway, I think like this might have benefited from a little playbook to go with the tome of rules, similar to what I've seen in the past. I think that we're all in luck right now. There's really good playthroughs, and the errata, there's constant feedback and input from the designers who are answering questions literally within hours. And so it's really not missed when you have that kind of presence available to you for people playing this game who want to really learn about it. So I also wish this had a playmat. Again, this isn't a drawback of it. When you see all these little incongruent piles and orientations, and you're kind of just looking at this patchwork maze of things on your tableau and theirs and stuff, it's all great, it all works, but I would love a cohesive playmat. I think I'm going to bug someone on Etsy to see if they can come up with some playmat that really just lets you lay out the cards. And I don't know, there's something about that I like. The other thing is, if you're teaching this game, the civs are different. So not different like Root, where you have an entirely different rule set for every single person playing for the most part. But there are exceptions, and they do rival the similarities in some respects of this game. Something to think about when you're playing. So anyway, that's it for the cons. Notice none of them really were critiquing the gameplay or such, and there's probably a reason for that. So let's get into the pros. I was very happy with the iconography, with the flow of the game, with the cards had just the right amount of wording, the right iconography. It's consistent. It makes sense. Everything matches up. I really think it's ingenious, the progression kind of system that they have. I really like it. It mirrors actual civilization building games that you'll play on the computer or in larger boxes in a much larger scale than this one. I love the incremental upgrades over time, where you start off in this sort of barbarian age, which is so natural for a civ building game. You have kind of idea of what you're going to kind of grow into, but not enough, and then poof, you're into the next age, and there you start to feel like you're setting down roots as this iconic civilization with substantial and impacting choices forthwith. There's a lot of brain-bending choices here on your turn, both from your own deck and from looking at the common cards and where they're at and what you can do. A lot of choices. Maybe a little analysis paralysis for some folks, but so far I found it to be just fine. There's lots of give and take, ebb and flow. You're putting out cards down, but not always forever. You're deciding what to do. Kind of the fate of a card is just as important as the fate of your civilization. So you put a card down, you get resources from it, or you exhaust it and you use its ability, or you have another card that's boosted by the icons on that card, or you draw that card back in your discard pile so you can recycle it and play it again, or there's solstice effects at the end of every round and all that stuff. There's just a lot going on, and a lot that I find really attractive in the bite-sized decision-making department. The civilizations are so distinct and varied that you will find yourself in drastically different sort of circumstances and motivations with each one that you play. You're not just swapping out a few stats on cards and going, well, Macedonians are a little better with attack, but the Persians are a little better with horse-driven attack and stuff. Nothing like that. They are wildly different, especially if you get the Legends pack. If you get the Legends pack, you have amazing, fantastical variants of games, and each of the civs feels like you'd want them to feel historically. Clearly, there's a love put into this game for the civilizations and trying to make them act like you want them to act in your mind through history in the past, as opposed to history in the future. Anyway, the AI is fantastic. The system is really, really just perfect. It's just enough overhead to make it play quasi-cleverly, but not overwhelmingly, an overwhelming set of instructions. You're not going down a flow chart that's 4 pages long. I've done that. There are games where I feel like that's probably the best way to do it. Here, you're not just leaving it to like, okay, just randomly decide stuff, and you're not just going, go down the flow chart. You're right in the middle where you're like, okay, it's a little bit randomized, but still each civilization kind of has their own chart of things to do that steers towards what you would think they'd do as a human anyway. I really like it. Not a lot of overhead. You can play your turn, then you can play their turn in rapid fire succession. Really good. Not surprising given who's working on the project. Yeah. So anyway, the power curves on play is a nice tightrope where you walk between using these powerful cards in your hand or getting powerful cards, and at the same time, you are trying to race through your deck to advance. And so you're like, that lovely decision making of, do I discard this card? That could be advantageous. Do I give up this and because it's going to circle back around again because I really want to get through to get to the empire version of my civilization, because it is a race in the end. I love those decisions. There's so much to do on your turn, and it still feels like so much could be done even after that. So win or lose, you can look back on these games and these matches, and you can kind of see where you steered wrong, where you could have made a choice to not discard or to discard, to go one direction and not the other, rather than just being where the die of fate flips you off and that's your destiny. So that's a lot that I can say about it. So let's talk about this again. So have you ever here's a phenomenon that I do. Whenever I'm playing civilization games like Age of Empires or Nations or even a role-playing game or Fallout or whatever, if you're like me, you spend an inordinate amount of time on the civilization screens. Pick your civ, and you could go down a list, click one, and get into the match. Or are you the type of person that clicks on it, looks at the bonuses, looks at the benefits and the drawbacks, looks at the special units you can get, goes over in your mind, oh, which one do I really want to play, which one I want to do, mentally calculating how you focus your energies when picking each one? If that's the type of person you are, you're probably really going to like this game, because this Imperial Legends, Imperial Classics, it makes that slice of that game kind of its own full-fledged game of its own, and then extends it with a very capable, albeit not entirely streamlined, gameplay flow, like the aforementioned games like Civ and Age of Empires and StarCraft, like whatever, I will definitely be playing this game for a long, long time. I will be pitting each Civ against the others. I just will. It's just right up my alley. I want to see civilizations clash. I want to compare them. I want to use their special purposes against each other. I love that there's a lot of puzzle-like decision making here, but it doesn't degenerate into feeling like you're playing a puzzle that's trapped in the borders of a given puzzle, if that makes sense. I like the puzzliness, but I don't always like puzzle games like Legends of Andor, etc. I really like this. I really do feel like when I'm playing this, I'm steering a civilization indicative of its historical highlights to victory or defeat. Definitely, yet again, in a year of real big surprises, this is yet another very pleasant 10 out of 10 surprise. I highly recommend this to anyone who really likes to just buckle down and have fun playing some Civilization. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Harebrained Games.